Good morning. My name is Anna Holtzclaw. I am honored to stand here in front of you as a representative of ULI Memphis and welcome you to this morning's presentation. It is a great thrill for me to have Dr. Johnson with us back here in Memphis. Several years ago, when we were just originating the concept of RegionSmart, we were talking to different people in town and saying, who should we bring in and have as a speaker? And good friends of mine, Douglas and Nicole Scarborough, said, oh, we've got the perfect person you've got to have come in town. He's great. He's this statistician. He's this very dynamic speaker. And never in my life had someone used the words statistician and dynamic speaker in the same sentence before. But Douglas and Nicole are not only good judges of character, but great judges of good speakers. And all of you who are here this morning are going to truly experience not what a great statistician can do, but a very dynamic and engaging speaker. The information he brings to us, I think, is so important for all of us to know and understand, not just as people in the real estate industry, but as Mid-Southerners as we look forward to how we want to move our city and our community and our region forward. And so I'm thrilled that he is back here in Memphis talking to us about what's happening in our country and focusing specifically here on the Delta and the Mid-South and informing us again on that. So with that, I'd like Douglas, my friend and colleague and co-sponsor of this event, to come forward and introduce Dr. Johnson formally. Thanks, Douglas.
Thank you, Anna. I'm Douglas Scarborough, Senior Vice President and Regional Executive for the Memphis branch of the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. We're happy to be able to sponsor or co-sponsor this event. I think very highly of Dr. Johnson, and it aligns very well with the bank's mission. We've been in the Memphis community for 100 years. The Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis was started about 103 years ago, and the Memphis branch was started 100 years ago, and it's actually started, as many of you all know, we have a history in cotton, and we were started as being able to accept those collateral receipts at the discount window that we had downtown. We're in our 4th location. We do a number of different things now that include everything from economic development to community development, economic education, excuse me, to community development. Those of you that come to the bank, you know, you come through airport-like security. I always kid and say we keep a little bit of cash on hand, but that is one of the many functions that we do in community. We do have a dual mandate at the Federal Reserve, and the dual mandate is around stable prices and full employment. And this falls into full employment because, as a very kind of layman's term, full employment is when everybody that wants to have a job has a job. But as we know, and as we look at that, and as we look at the Memphis economy and the Mid-South economy, is not only people that have a job, but also people that are employed in the way that they would like to, and understanding how to build the best economy by using your workforce in the best means. And Dr. Johnson speaks directly to that. Dr. Johnson is the William Keenan Jr. Distinguished Professor of Strategy and Entrepreneurship and Director of the Urban Investment Strategy Center at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He was going to talk today about 6 demographic disruptions that would change our lives. But he's also the co-author of the economic impact of the African American population on the state of North Carolina. He is researching the economic and employment impact of white-collar job shifts and offshore on U.S. competitiveness. And also, he works in Chapel Hill. He operates runs the Global Scholars Academy, a K-8 laboratory charter school in Durham focused on guaranteeing college access to kids from disadvantaged neighborhoods. One of the things I think about is that he'll give you the information and data behind recently, actually December, and I think it must be in the water there in Chapel Hill. I was in Chapel Hill for a session over in the Gillen School of Public Health, and one of the things that they were talking about and they were teaching us was about the 5 whys. And it is a structure and it's a method of asking questions that gets down to the core problem. So you ask, you have a problem, you ask why, and by the time you get to that 5th, sometimes you get to that 6th or 7th why, you're able to understand what that core problem is. I think that what Dr. Johnson will do here today is not only help us answer that, but give us the data behind the 5 whys and what the core problem is, and then how we can go on to a solution. So with that, I introduce to you Dr. James Johnson.
Good morning. I'm delighted to be here. I want to thank Anna and Douglas for inviting me back to be with you this morning, to share a few thoughts with you today. Ladies and gentlemen, our nation, every region, every state, including the state of Tennessee, and every community in this state is in the midst of an unprecedented demographic transformation. The kinds of changes we find ourselves in the midst of, you're going to have to buckle your seatbelt to deal with them. And if you ignore them at your own peril. There are lots of things you can debate politically today. I want to suggest to you that basic demography is not one of them. I assure you, if you're 5 years old today, 5 years from now, you're going to be 10 years old. Your birthday comes at the same time every year. You just add 1 to what it was last year, and voila, you got it. In fact, every year when I go in for my annual review with my dean, I come out with a big raise. So I walk in and say, you know, I was 62 years old when we met last year. You know what? I'm 63 now. And next year when we meet, I'm going to be 64. It's called forecasting. I'm the best in the business. The kinds of changes we find ourselves in the midst of, we call them disruptive demographic trends because they're going to dramatically transform all of our social, economic, and political institutions. They're going to transform the workforce. They're going to transform workplaces. They're going to transform consumer markets. Everything is up for grabs in terms of the kinds of changes we find ourselves in the midst of. And I want to talk about the 6 disruptive demographic trends that are going to change our nation and your great state of Tennessee. I'm going to talk about what the trends are, where I see challenges, and I want to talk about this whole notion, given the kinds of disruptive demographic trends we find ourselves in the midst of, what are your keys to maintaining and enhancing competitiveness? How do you become the destination of choice for both people and businesses? How do you thrive and prosper in a new normal, where in an economy where the new normal is certain uncertainty? You're going to have to buckle your seatbelt to think about those issues. I'm going to be relying on 2 decennial censuses. You know, every 10 years, the Census Bureau, U.S. Census Bureau conducts a national count of our population. The last one was in 2010. How many of you all completed your 2010 census form? Don't lie, I got your iris retinal scan, I'll go check. If you remember the form, it was 1 page front and back. Depending on the number of crumb snatchers you have in your household, it took between about 10 seconds and about 15 seconds to finish that thing. Radically different from earlier censuses, because in earlier censuses there was something called the census long form. And the emphasis was really on long, because you needed breakfast, you needed lunch, you needed dinner, and about 3 stiff drinks to finish that thing. They wanted to know about your firstborn, your lastborn, the one you don't want on up to, everything. It's not working?
Is your mic, is it not working?
It's on green.
Oh, testing? Yep, it's on.
Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Now I forgot everything I was saying. Can I come back next week? They wanted to know about your firstborn, your lastborn, everything about you they wanted to know. The one you don't own up to, everything in your business, they wanted to know in that census. We don't do the census long form in the decennial census anymore because we have another way of collecting data called the American Community Survey, which is in essence that census long form. But the good thing is it is administered to a representative sample of the U.S. population on an annual basis. So we no longer have to wait 10 years to figure out what the big trends are. Those of us who are pointy-headed academics, we're in demographic heaven. We just get this number. All we do is mine data. So what I will be doing for you today is relying on 2 decennial censuses, the 2000 to 2010, and I'll bring you up to 2016 using the American Community Survey. Now, I've been a demographer for a long time, about 35 years, and so I've been studying demographic trends. And I want to suggest to you that there are 6 disruptive trends that are going to dramatically transform everything that we do. I'm going to list them. We're going to talk about each one of them. The South rises again. The second one is the browning of America. The third one is marrying out is in. The fourth one is the silver tsunami is about to hit. The fifth one, the end of men. I didn't make it up. It's actually the title of a book by a writer from the Atlantic magazine. I encourage you to read the book. If you don't have time to read the book, there are 2 articles in the magazine preceding publication of the book. The first one is by that title, The End of Men. The second one is called Boys on the Side. It'll become apparent what that means as we go through the presentation. I only had one disagreement with the book. She had a period at the end of the sentence. Being a male, I refuse to put a period at the end of the sentence. We're going to see if it has any juice in a minute. My last one is Cooling Water from Grandma's Well. Anybody know what that is? It's a song. I'm not going to sing it for you, but I'm going to tell you what it's all about. Cooling Water from Grandma's Well and Ground Stew. Let's talk about what each one of these means for you and our region. The South rises again. I'm talking about the southern United States as defined by the Census Bureau, the states here in red. If you know your history, you know the South for much of the 20th century was an economically backward region. It was had all kinds of racial challenges and the like. It was the place to leave as opposed to the place to be and to come to. I actually grew up in North Carolina, and I went to high school in 1968, which means I was in the first wave of school integration in the South, mandatory school integration. And I remember it quite vividly as if it were yesterday. I was an athlete who played football and basketball. And I remember my first football game as a freshman. It was actually an away game. And I remember when we arrived at the opposing team's football field, the KKK was marching outside the stadium, daring us to beat the opposing team. You know, youthful exuberance is something. We beat them so bad they couldn't spell KKK by the end of it. But that was the South at the time. It was the place. I couldn't wait to get out of the South when I graduated from college in 1972. Went to the Midwest to graduate school and then taught at UCLA for 15 years, but I'm back. But if you look at the data, you see something interesting. What you will see, looking at the data from the turn of the 20th century to about 1970, the South only captured about 30% of net national population growth in our country. It was a place to leave. More people were leaving than going, and to the extent that it grew, it was an excess of births over deaths. So it was only about 30% growth. But then something profound happened after 1970. Ladies and gentlemen, every decade since 1970, the South has captured about half of net national population growth in this country. We've gone from the place to leave to being the place to be. We've gone from the place where we speak 2 languages, English and bad English, to one we speak more than 300 different languages today. We've become the cat's meow demographically, the destination for people, including the first decade of the new millennium, where we added 27 million people to our population. 14 million of them concentrated in the South, growth rate about 53%. You note that the second most rapidly growing region was the West region. What's going on in our country is this profound redistribution of population from the Northeast and the Midwest to the West and the South, and tag, we are it in terms of growth. 14 of that 26 million people. What's going on? Why is this happening? It's all about migration and it's all about immigration. Look at the data. 2000 to 2008, everybody moving to the South. The only region where everybody was moving in larger numbers than were leaving. Total migrants, African Americans, Hispanic Latino population, the elderly population, the foreign-born population, everybody moving south in larger numbers. You can't say that about the West region. The West was losing the Hispanic population, and they were losing the elderly. If you come to the Midwest, the only group moving there between 2000 and 2008 in larger numbers than were leaving were the elderly population. And this is a news flash. After this lady cold snap, they're going to be the heck out of there too. So just buckle your seatbelt. And the Northeast is kind of when the last person leaves, please turn off the lights if there's still any there. This is a profound kind of redistribution of population that's driven by immigration and migration that is dramatically transforming our region. But I told you, I lied, I said it was the South. It's really not the South. It's really about 4 states in the South. This movement is really about Texas, Florida, Georgia, and North Carolina. Those 4 states combined captured about 80% of that net national population growth. Doesn't mean other states like Tennessee aren't growing. They're just not the primary migrants. The other southern states combined only captured about 29% of that growth. So it's an uneven pattern of growth where we talk about these migration magnet states. Now, I stopped purposely on an earlier graphic at 2008 in terms of migration destination because we had something called a Great Recession. So the question becomes, what impact did the Great Recession have on these trends we're talking about? The answer is a slowdown in the magnitude of movement, not a change in the directionality of movement. Look at the data. 2004 to 2007, a net gain in the South of about 655,000 migrants. During the Great Recession, 2007 to 2010, it dropped down to 396,000 people. But look at Florida. Florida actually flipped during the Great Recession. Always been a migration magnet, but it flipped. Why would Florida flip? Well, a lot of those people who moved to Florida with nice retirement portfolios, what happened to their retirement portfolios? They went further south. I'm going to show you in a minute. They are called the newly unretires. They are back in the workplace. And then there were some people who moved to Florida and aged to a level that they need caregiving support. What did their caregivers say? We're not coming there. You're going to have to come to where I am. Now understand, my message to you here is that I'm talking about long-range, long-term demographic shifts, but understand they can be disrupted by perturbations in your economy and the like. Obviously, Florida is back to being a major migration destination, but you can have these great disruptions. On the international side, we've become very draconian on immigrants since 9/11. I want to suggest to you that's not a good thing for us, and I'll explain to you why I believe that in just a moment in terms of the kinds of changes. So what's happened since 2010 to 2016, we've added another 14 million people to our population in this country. 7.8 million of them concentrated in the South, 54% of that growth. The trend from the first decade of the new millennium continues in the second decade of the new millennium. The West capturing about a third of that growth. Very, very small shares in the Northeast and the Midwest in terms of the kinds of changes we're talking about. The only difference is it's no longer just Texas, Florida, Georgia, North Carolina. You got to add Virginia to the mix because Virginia in and around the Beltway is growing like crazy. So you get these migration magnets. About 20% of that growth concentrated in the other southern states going. What's happening in, again, it doesn't mean Tennessee and Memphis aren't growing. It just means they're not growing as fast as the rest of the country and the region. Tennessee added close to 648,000 people during the first decade of new millennium, growing at 11%, faster than the national average, slower than the nation. And here in your Memphis MSA added about 109,000 people, growing at a rate of about 9% in terms of changes. 2010 to 2016, the state added another 306,000 people, growing at about 4%. Memphis region added about 20,000 people, 1.5% growth rate, when the nation was growing at 4%, and the region was growing at about 6.7% in terms of change. So doesn't mean you aren't growing, you're growing, but it's relative to the dynamic that's going on in the region as a whole. Now, to understand the dynamic in your region and where this growth is occurring and may not be occurring in your region, we often use something called the balance of change population equation. Your population in your community changes as a function of two forces, inflows and outflows, and both of those things are going on simultaneously. How do you measure inflows? You get inflows by people being born and by people moving into your community. At the same time people are being born and moving in, you have outflows, people are dying, and what? Leaving your community. It's the dynamic interaction of those two sets of forces that drive what's going on into your community to change. When you apply that equation, you come up with this typology of communities and what's going on. You want to be in one of the top 3 because that's all about growth, okay? Down here, dying, biological decline, and emptying out, you're losing population. We're going to post this on the website. You can look at the definitions very closely at that time, but let me tell you, you got in the Memphis MSA, you got 1 balanced growth, you got 3 natural growth communities, you got 4 emptying out counties, and you got 1 county that's dying. What do I mean by dying? Out-migration exceeds in-migration and death exceeds births. Only viable business there is an undertaker. I saw him when on my way in, he 89, who gonna bury him? You're only strong as your weakest link in all of this. What do we mean? Look at Memphis, 2010 to 2016. Close to, depending on which data set you use, you get 18,000, 20,000 people moving in. Total population change was 18,000 here. Natural change, excess of births over deaths, added 47,000 people to your population, but you lost what? 28,000 people to out-migration, people leaving. It's the difference in these two numbers that tell you what kind of change is going on in your community. In Tennessee, you are a balanced growth state because you had growth from natural change, excess of births over deaths, and you had net in-migration, so you're growing under both forces. So Memphis is sort of a departure from the norm in terms of the kinds of changes that are going on. Memphis SMSA, you lost 28,000 people through migration. You have net international migration coming in, but domestic is what? Lots of people leaving. The question is, how do you reverse that process and create opportunities to become the destination for people to both stay and do what? Come here and think. Fayette is your balanced county. Tennessee is your balanced growth. You're growing from both natural change and net migration. That's a balanced growth community. You got 3 natural growth communities. They're losing through migration, but excess of births over death is what's driving the change. So it's the local population growth there. And emptying out counties, you're growing through natural change, but net out migration over what? Surpasses that, so you get what? Loss here. And that's that dying county where natural change is negative and net migration is negative. So you got an uneven pattern of growth within your metropolitan area. That's got to be part of the strategy of thinking about how do you deal with those and address those issues moving forward. Now, at the same time that you have this uneven growth, and the region as a whole, the South, is experiencing huge population change and becoming a destination. There's a profound shift in the racial and ethnic complexion of our communities. And in that profound shift, there's a profound shift in the age composition of our communities. And we say that there are 2 colorful processes that undergird those shifts, what we call the browning of America and the graying of America. And both of those things are going on at the same time, okay? And so I'm going to talk about them separately for you. First, the browning of America. And the browning of our region is immigration-driven population change. I'm going to do a quick and brief abridged version of what I normally do here, but you'll get the sense. If you look at our history of immigration in the country from about 1900 to 2015, what you will see is that we kept immigration in our country low until around the mid-1960s. Then you see a huge takeoff and increase in immigration. 1965 is a crucial year in that distinction. Prior to 1965, we had an immigration law in this country that said if we were going to allow the foreign-born to come to our country, it was important that they not upset the existing racial and ethnic balance of our country as it existed at the turn of the 20th century. So we had an express preference for people who were phenotypically similar to Anglo-Saxons, people that come to America, anglicize their names, speak the kings and queens English, all of those things that undergird an assimilation process. We favored people from Europe and from Western Europe in particular. And if you want to see the impact of that, go back to the 1880s and look at our immigration law then. We had something called the Chinese exclusion law. They shouldn't be allowed to come to America because it'd be, quote unquote, difficult to assimilate into mainstream society. If you fast forward to the first decade of the 20th century, we defined what became known as the Asiatic Barrier region that included Japan. Shouldn't be allowed to come to America because it would be, quote unquote, difficult to assimilate into mainstream society. And we justified those laws based on a whole series of racist theories about cultural inferiority, but we controlled the composition of our population through those mechanisms. 1965 is an important year in our history because coincident with the civil rights movement and domestic life, we liberalized our immigration law that year via something called the Hart-Celler Act of 1965. Put a pin in it because it's one of the most profound pieces of legislation in our history. What did the Hart-Celler Act do? It eliminated those discriminatory provisions based on geographic origin, opening up the doors of our country to people who heretofore had not been allowed to enter on a basis. Basically people from Asia, Latin America, and the Middle East. 1965 is so important in our immigration history that we use it as a dividing line to distinguish 2 groups of immigrants. Anybody arrived prior to 1965, we call them the old immigrants, and we refer to them further as the invisible minorities. Why invisible? Phenotypically similar to the Anglo-Saxon model. You learn to speak English, you anglicize your name and the like. It becomes difficult to distinguish where you are from. Anybody arriving since 1965, We call them the new immigrants and the so-called visible minorities. Why visible? From radically different regions of the world, radically different phenotype. Yes, you can, go through the assimilation process, but you will always know that they're different because their phenotype is different. Most of these people, ladies and gentlemen, moving here are people of color, and that is what has been driving demographic change in our society since 1965. Understand that now what we want to do in this country is we want to have about 1 million people entering our country annually. We want to cut that into half, and we want to stem tides of immigration from diversity, our diversity allocation, all of that we want to cut out. I want to suggest to you that that's not good for us. But let's look at, before we even get there, who are these people that we're talking about since 1965? Well, about 46% of them are Hispanic, Latino, and about 26% of them are Asian. Note that only about 18% of the incoming people are non-Hispanic white. Those numbers would have been flipped in 1965 and earlier. So we're talking about a dramatic transformation in our population in terms of the kinds of changes. These are mostly people from Asia, Latin America, and the Middle East that have dramatically transformed the composition of our population in this country. I asked you about, did you complete your census form for a reason? Because in that census form, they asked you to self-identify. They asked you first and foremost, are you Hispanic or non-Hispanic? And if you said, I'm Hispanic, you check the Hispanic box. If you say, no, I'm not Hispanic, I'm non-Hispanic, then they kind of ask you another question, well, what the heck are you? Are you non-Hispanic white? Are you non-Hispanic black, American Indian, Alaska Native, Asian, Native Hawaiian, or are you a person of 2 or more races, a mixed race person? What did the census show? We added 27 million people to our population during that first decade of new millennium. 15.2 million of them were Hispanic, growing at a rate of about 43%, okay? Note that the non-Hispanic population only grew by what? About 12.2 million or 4.9%. But the number I want to draw your attention to is what was the rate of growth for the non-Hispanic white population? It grew by 2.3 million or 1.2%, okay? Now everybody between this yellow line and that yellow line, all of these folks, double-digit growth except one group, American Indians and Alaska Natives, those are all people of color, ladies and gentlemen. When I talk about the browning of America, I'm talking about where your source of growth is going to come from, and it's among these non-white ethnic minority groups that are dramatically transforming the composition of our population. How big of a thing is this browning of America? 27 million people, 92% of them were non-white, and about 55% of them were what? Latino, Hispanic Latino. If you go down, if you look at the South, that 14.3 million, about 80% of it was non-white, and about 46% of it were Hispanic Latino. That's what's undergirding the change. All of the other states here, those migration magnet states. You come forward to that 2010-2016 period, 14 million people, 92% of it was non-white, 51% of it were Hispanic. Here in the South, it's about 82 and 43%, transforming the complexion of our society here. This is so important to your future, ladies and gentlemen, because what you have to understand is that migration and immigration are age-selective processes. What does that mean? It means far more young people migrate and immigrate than old people. That means old people don't move. They move slower and at a lower propensity than young people. So one more piece to this story. Don't repeat this anywhere because you can get put out of the great state of Tennessee. In fact, I'm going to deny I say this before I say it. Young people are more likely to have children than old folks. When you put those two things together, age selectivity of people coming in, favoring young people, and higher fertility among those groups, it has an impact on the age structure in your community, okay? So look at it. Median age of the U.S. population in 2014 was 38 years old. What does that mean? Half of us younger than that, half of us older than that. What's the median age of a Hispanic in America? 28 years old. Now, how many of you have heard in the immigration debate that Hispanic immigrants are a burden on the healthcare system in America? Heard that? What kind of major health problems do you have when your median age is 28? Before you answer that, what's the median age of a non-Hispanic white in America? 43. When you're in your 20s, ladies and gentlemen, you typically have acute crisis. You've done something stupid, like stick your finger in a lawnmower, you got to go to the hospital and get it glued back on. But when you move from your 20s to your 40s, what happens to your health crisis? They move from what? Acute to what? Chronic. Which one costs the most? Chronic. I know. I lost my wife to cancer at 48 years old. Her treatment, the last 6 months of life, $5,000 a week. Ladies and gentlemen, when you're in your what you hear makes no sense. These are young people that we're going to need to prepare us in the future. Understand the dynamic, okay? There's one more piece to this story, and this is for the ladies in the room. Ladies, you can tell the guys to close their ears, but I think they need to hear this. Ladies, there's something in demography called completed fertility, okay? I'm not going to give you the big theory today. Come to Chapel Hill, pay us $100,000 a year, I'll give it to you early and often. The pop version, ladies, completed fertility is when you tell your husband or your boo, go take out the trash, ain't nothing else happening here. Completed fertility for women occurs between the ages of 40 and 44. There's this precipitous drop in fertility there. What's the median age of a non-Hispanic white female in America? What's the median age of a Latino female in America? 29. Now, between these two numbers, these are all women of color. You will note a 10 to 20 year gap in the median age. Do you know what that gap is? That's your fertility gap. We know exactly where kids are going to come from in the future. Now, I fully understand that some of y'all in your 40s are I'm going home and fix this tonight. What I would say is go ahead. Leave now. At every stoplight out there, let it cycle through 3 or 4 times. Get all the rest you can get. You might go home and squeeze out one, but you're not going to do what a 29-year-old can do. Ladies and gentlemen, this is fundamental biology. You build a wall around your country and you keep everybody out and you are aging out of the fertility years. That's a slight problem. It's called the future competitiveness of your nation and your region. You got a slight problem. Because the last time I looked, you need a new gene pool to keep things what? Going. Understand. It's fundamental biology. I didn't make it up. You know, you just check it out. Understand the dynamic. We're an aging population, and you got to be mindful of that. Lots of the stuff that you hear in the immigration debate makes no sense, ladies and gentlemen. You have to be able to link what's going on in our country and what we need in terms of future labor force, consumer markets, and the like. These things are dynamic and all that bit. So what's been going on in Tennessee? If you look at your population for the state, 4% growth. For the total population, your non-Hispanic population, white population grew by 4.1%. But look at all your, in essence, although you're not growing as rapidly, you're following the demographic trend in terms of the browning of your state, just like everybody else. The only population, non-white population is declining is the American Indian Native population for the state, and that's a small group of people that is declining, but everything else, your white population grew by 2.7% when you see all of these other growth rates, including a 20% growth rate for your Hispanic population state. What's happening in Memphis? These red things are declining. Your white population declined by 3.7%. Your American Indian population declined, and your Native Hawaiian Pacific, those are very small numbers. This is a number you got to be mindful of. Everything else is growing. You're following that trend of the browning of America. The rates are just different from the region as a whole and the nation as a whole, but the same kind of trends apply to your region and raises all kinds of issues. So in Tennessee, 58% of your growth was non-white, and about 19% of it was Latino. Here, all of the growth in Memphis is non-white because the white population is declining. All of it is declining. And about 28% of it is Hispanic, Latino. You would be a new Hispanic magnet compared to the other states. We began in North Carolina growing with a Hispanic population. In the 1990s, we have well over 1 million Hispanics in North Carolina today. And so those are the kinds of changes. Why is this so important to your future here? Look at your median age. Median age is 37, but the median age of a non-Hispanic white female is 44, and the median age of a Hispanic is what? 23. Where's your growth going to come from? Those of you in business, where your new market's going to come from? Don't fall for the hype. I shouldn't be telling y'all that because we compete with y'all in North Carolina. I don't know what I'm doing. But understand the dynamic. Understand. We're talking about a heck of a color adjustment in our population. If you look at births, in 1990, 66% of our births in America are non-Hispanic whites. That dropped to 50% by 2008 for the first time in history. In 2011, non-Hispanic white births no longer with a numerical majority. It's unlikely to go that direction again because what? We're aging and we've got future kinds of changes in the composition of our population. It's going to be these non-white groups that are driving growth. We're talking about a heck of a color adjustment, what I call the browning of America. In 2005, 67% of our population was non-Hispanic white. 10 years earlier, it was about 74%. We now think, looking out to 2050, that the non-Hispanic white share is going to drop below 50% at around 47% growth, of, especially a Hispanic population driving growth. That's the key to our future. It's the key to our future because at the same time that the browning of America, which is immigration-driven, has occurred, our native-born population is aging, what we call the graying of America. So I think it's a fair question just ask at the outset, well, how do I know if I'm part of the graying of America? There are 4 ways, okay? Number 1, if you have difficulty seeing this screen, you're part of the graying of America. Number 2, if you got to go to the restroom twice during this presentation, you're part of the graying of America. And number 3, if you fall asleep, you're just old codger, it ain't my fault, you're part of the graying of America. The graying of America is about 3 things. It's about changes in longevity, it's about declining fertility, and it's about a group of us who were born between 1946 and 1964. Longevity first. Ladies and gentlemen, we're living much longer today than we ever anticipated in our history. In 1935, when we introduced Social Security in America, the average person turning 65 was going to live another 12.7 years. Okay? That same person turning 65 today is going to live another 18.7 years to about 83. And we now think living to 100 on a routine basis is well within reach. And there's one school of thought that says a person who will live to 130 has already been born. What is this all about? How can that be? Well, we've got major advances in medical care and health that extends our lives. You all are eating better some of the time. You all are exercising, being active some of the time. And then we got this thing called regenerative medicine. We have a scientist in North Carolina that has actually regenerated a bladder. So your bladder wear out, we'll sell you another one. You just tell me what color you want. We're working on every body part now around the world, so we're being able to extend life well beyond what we ever anticipated, and that you see it in sort of the age curve in terms of what's going on. We think there'll be well over 600,000 centenarians in this country, over 100 by 2050. I've seen some new numbers that up this now to about 750,000 to 1 million centenarians over 100 years old living in the U.S. In terms of our aging phenomenon. Part of that aging thing is because fertility rates have changed. They're down. And you can look at it from the standpoint of women as they have become more active in the labor market, career-oriented and the like, you see a profound change in the birth curve. So if you looked at 1976, and you got to look at those women 40 to 44 that's into the childbearing years. In 1976, only about 10% of women 40 to 44 didn't have any children at all. But if you fast forward 30 years, that percentage went from 10% to what? 20% of women 40 to 44, no children whatsoever, okay? In 1976, the average woman 40 to 44 had 3.1 children. That's above replacement level. If you're going to replace yourself as a couple, you got to have 2.1 kids, okay? Don't ask me about the 0.1, you just got to be rocking and rolling when you do it. You got to have 2.1 kids. You fast forward to 2006, the average number of children a woman 40 to 44 had was what? 1.9. It dropped below replacement level. 59% of women 40 to 44 in 1976 had 3 or more kids. Only 28% of them had 3 or more kids in 2006. Why is this important? And why? Well, ladies, this room is a powerful statement. Y'all are educated, career-oriented. What happens when y'all become educated and career-oriented? What happens to the age of marriage? Goes up, right? What happens to the age of childbirth? Goes up, right? If those two things go up, what happens to the median age of the population? Well, you reduce fertility and the median age of your population goes up. So understand that this decline in fertility is important. If you want to measure whether you're growing through fertility, remember, you have to have, if you're a couple, 2.1 kids to replace yourself. It's 2.1 because some babies die at birth, so it's a statistical average. So if 2.1 is the magic number, who's replacing themselves in America? You got one group. You got one group. You build a wall around your country and run everybody home. What you got left? A bunch of old fuddy-duddies. The Bengay crowd. Non-Hispanic whites have had a total fertility rate between about 1.7 and 1.9 for 2 decades. What does that mean? The average white family has 1.9 kids. Now, I'm a little complex and confused by this because I don't know how the heck you get a 0.9 of a kid. I taught a few of them at Chapel Hill. It takes 2.1 kids to replace yourself. Ladies and gentlemen, understand that the future competitiveness of your region is tied to your demography. If you're not replacing yourself, you can't grow. You got no market. Okay? Understand. It's a fundamental biology. It's not even sociology. And then there's a group of us born between 1946 and 1964. Let me see a show of hands. 1946 to 1964. Look around you. Some of y'all ain't got your hand up line, but it's all right. Those of us who have our hands up born between 1946 and 1964 are part of the post-World War II hormonal rush in America. It was our fathers who went off to World War II and came back home and got busy. Got busy to the tune of producing 81 million of us. We're the boomer generation. And on January 1st of 2011, the first baby boomer born in America turned 65 and became eligible for what? Everything. Every day, 7 days a week, 365 days of the year for the next 20 years, we boomers will be turning 65 at the rate of 8,000 per day. That's every day, 7 days a week, 365 days of the year for the next 20 years. Look at 81 million people. In 2010, we were between the ages of 45 and 64. 81 million people, 20 million people moving in, a growth rate of about 32%. Note that the second most rapidly growing population was the 65 plus population. Why? Because that person turning 65 is going to live another 18.7 years. Look at that. It grew at 15%. So where's the growth in your population occurring? It's occurring in boomers and the older population. Understand, when somebody tells you that Social Security is a pay-as-you-go system, what does that mean? It means you're paying in, but somebody else is doing what? Spending your money. In order for you to get something out of it, what needs to be happening among the younger population? It needs to be growing and what? Paying in, right? Got a slight problem, though. What happened to the 25 to 44-year-old population? These are the folks that got to be working every day and paying in order for you to do what? Get something out. But it actually declined. One of the things that we've missed in all of the debate about immigration and everything else is that some of the debilitating diseases that beset us boomers and pre-boomers later in life are now besetting Gen X and Gen Y earlier in life, leading to the early onset of death and disability. You can't pay your bills if this population is not doing what? Growing and working. Diabetes, obesity. And the biggest thing is probably the opioid crisis. That's what it looked like in 1999. That's what it looked like in 2014. 11,000 people hospitalized daily and over 100 deaths daily. About 62,000 last year. Who are they? They're the very young people that you want to be doing what? Working and contributing to our population. This opioid crisis is so bad, it has affected the life expectancy of the U.S. population at birth. Okay? Understand the dynamic, connect the dots in terms of the kinds of things that we're talking about here for your future. 8,000 people turning 65 daily. But I don't want you to think that us old fuddy-duddies are all obsessing over memory loss and continence and whatever. We are actually one mobile bunch of people. Where are they headed? You can't see this very well because they come through. Trust me, they're all headed where? South. Buckle your seatbelt. They're coming. They're coming. Where are they coming? Red states, elderly population growing at a higher rate than the national area. Yellow states, they're not. They're coming. Tennessee is one of them, right? Those are the destinations, micropolitan, metropolitan destinations. Three things matter: amenities, mountains, water, and golf courses. You can have all of those things, that gets you in the mix. You got to have one other thing. You got to have world-class health care within 30 to 45-minute commute. There, you're in the pink, like Pepto-Bismol. That's what's going to drive destination selection and going. But what we know is that there are a lot of communities out there where young people are leaving behind an older adult population that's doing what? Aging in place. These communities have huge dependency problems. What does that mean? They got a large number of older adults and not enough working age adults to do what? Take care of them. So if you looked at these purple places, they have somewhere between 60 older adults to 133 for every 100 working age adults. Can't pay your bills there. Can't pay your bills. And understand that when we say we're just talking about the number of working age adults, we don't say that they are actually doing what? Working. So this is a, poor look. So these are all dependency ratios. Even the green, the 40, you got 40 to 59 adults, older adults for every 100 workers. That's a challenge for us, and we got to figure out how to deal with it. If you look at your region, your population, 2010 to 2016 grew by 1.6%. Your young population, under 25, declined by 3.1%. Your 25 to 44-year-old population declined by 1%. Your 45 to 64 population grew by 1.3%. And your 65 plus population grew by what? 25%. Got a slight problem. Got a slight problem. Got a slight problem. Understand the dynamic. You need a diverse young gene pool to do what? Keep it all going. And you also need to recognize that there's an opportunity right there. This stuff has enormous implications for you, for your future. On the workforce side, the business side, what this means is this aging and browning thing, for the first time in history, we have 4 generations in the workplace and soon to be 5. Everybody from the pre-boomer born in 1945 or earlier, who's most familiar and in love with the rotary dial phone, to the millennial who waltzes into work at 10:30 in the morning with 2 buds in the ear whistling, to all of you boomers who arrive at 5:30 in the morning, because that's the way we roll. The boomer looks at the millennial and says, look at that, that's a bad work ethic. I'm working at rolling up here at 10:30 in the morning. The millennial takes the 2 buds out of the ear long enough to look at the boomer and say, you can't spell work ethic because I finished walking in the door what you've been navel-gazing at since 5:30 this morning. And Mr. Pre-Boomer's still trying to get the first rotary dial call out for the day. And then there's you with an HR system that is a one-size-fits-all. And understand that Gen Z, the next generation, is about to turn 18. So we're going to have 5 generations in the workplace, and most of us have one HR system. It's gridlock. It's going to cause serious problems. You need to understand the significance, and from a business standpoint, about where this just gives you some distribution by those generations, the number of people still in the workplace. That is a major challenge for us moving forward, an opportunity to fix this problem. So we're aging, so succession is a big issue. Those of us who are boomers, sooner or later, we got to go. Some of y'all know down to the minute when you got to go. Others, somebody going to have to pull a bulldozer in to bring your butt out. But you got to go sooner or later. That's succession. So the question becomes, how do we think about replacing those of us who are going to be aging out? Fully recognizing and understanding that the next generation can't look like us. Why? Because the population is more diverse, the markets are more diverse, you need a more diverse gene pool. So succession is a big issue for our organizations. And there's two pieces to it. How are you going to find the next generation of talent, the warm bodies problem? And secondly, how do we ensure knowledge succession? Those of us who are boomers and pre-boomers and the like, we got a little knowledge up here. What's going to happen to all of that knowledge when you leave? Well, if you haven't forgotten it all, it's going to do what? Go with you. The real challenge is how do you ensure what is called knowledge succession? From that generation to the next generation, have that dynamic interaction so you're not reinventing the wheel. So this succession planning is a huge, huge thing for you moving forward. The other issue that you have to understand in the future competitiveness of your region and your businesses is that child care won't be your big issue moving forward in organizations. I just showed you how fertility rates are way down. Doesn't mean that people aren't having children, but having fewer people having children. What will be your issue? Elder care. And elder care is radically different from child care. Child care is actually predictable. You drop your crumb snatch off at the daycare in the morning, you go pick them up at 5:30. Then you might have to go at lunchtime to do something they got no business, but typically that's the routine. Elder care, however, and in particular if you have a loved one with what? Alzheimer's or dementia, you're going to have to figure out how to squeeze work in. And ladies and gentlemen, we don't even have a clue about how to deal with this issue and problem. It's a $30 billion a year problem in terms of lost work productivity. And people don't talk about it for fear of reprisal in organizations because you got an HR system that is a one-size-fits-all. So I'm one of four. I have 3 siblings. And for the last decade, we've had 8 family members between the ages of 84 and 97 that we're responsible for taking care of. We're down to 2 now. One of us is 90 and the other one's 97. So it's 10:30 at night in February 2 years ago, 30 degrees outside. And my then 87-year-old uncle calls me and says his heat's not working. He lives an hour and a half from where I live. He says, my heat's not working and it's cold in here. He says, I must be out of oil. I says, you're not out of oil. I pay your oil bill. That oil company's so afraid of me, they dug holes around your house and put oil in. I know you're not out of oil. He says, well, maybe the system is broken. I says, I doubt that. We had just put it in a couple of years earlier, and I had it serviced right before Christmas because I didn't want anything happening to it. I said, I doubt that the system is out. He says, well, it's cold in here. Somebody needs to do something. Now, he lives an hour and a half from where I am. It's 10:30 at night. So I had to do what? Drive an hour and a half to try to see what's going on. And so the real issue is he's wheelchair bound, visually challenged, lives alone in an older house. And in the older houses, the thermostat is positioned on the wall and assumes that you're standing upright when you do what? Manipulate it. But he's wheelchair bound and visually challenged, got one of these little clickers that he picks up stuff. What has he done, ladies and gentlemen? He has turned the thermostat off, but he can't see well enough to know that he has turned the thermostat off. It's 10:30 at night, 30 degrees outside. I got an 8 o'clock class tomorrow morning. I got to drive an hour and a half to do what? Turn the thermostat on. You say, well, why didn't you call somebody in the neighborhood? He's the youngest cat in the neighborhood. That's elder care, ladies and gentlemen. That's elder care. If you're serious about taking care of your loved one, that's it. Now I can control his thermostat from my cell phone. But it costs $17,000 to rewire his house so you can do that. That's elder care, ladies and gentlemen. It's a huge, huge problem, opportunity in our society today that we don't even have a radar on. And what you need to understand is not just us old fuddy-duddies who have elder care responsibilities. 10 million millennials in America have elder care responsibilities. And you would say, where on earth can a millennial have elder care responsibility? Allow me to explain it to you. Assume that I'm 55. I'm not. Assume, secondly, that I go through a midlife crisis at 55. I did. Assume, thirdly, that in my 55th year of my midlife crisis, I marry a 30-year-old. Heaven forbid. And assume me and my 30-year-old gets it on and we have a child. How old am I when that kid turns 20? Old enough for the kid to look at you and say, what the heck were you thinking? Because all of a sudden, that's a kid that's 20 years old. It's got what? That's how you get there. So you don't know who in your organization has elder care responsibilities because we don't wear it on what? our foreheads, but it is a huge, huge issue that you need to understand that it can be a game changer. And when we build agile and flexible organizations that accommodate those kinds of issues, then you're going to more likely to have a well-honed organizational workforce. Family life's changing also. Marrying out is in. What does that mean? As you know, until the mid-1960s, it was even illegal for blacks and whites to marry in America. That ended, but I'm not just talking about black-white marriages. What I'm talking about is a profound shift in the composition of marriages. Marrying out as in means you marry someone of a different racial or ethnic group than you belong to. The out-marriage rate among newly married couples doubled between 1980 and 2008 from about 7% of all marriages to about 15%. And for currently married people, it went from 3 to 8% of all marriages. But who's doing all this hooking up in strange ways here? Well, about 41% of those marriages are between Hispanics and whites. About 15% of them are between Asians and whites. And about 16% of the cases, both marriage partners are non-white, black and Latino, Asian and Latino, or black, whatever. And note that black-white marriages is the smallest share of what we're talking about. And there are 17% of people, I don't know who the heck they are, but they're having fun. They're hooking up. What's the significance here? The second most rapidly growing population behind Hispanic Latinos in America, or Latinx, are people, people who self-identify as two or more races. What's the significance here? Be careful how you portray family life in marketing and advertising. Be careful how you portray your community in your promotions as a place to live and do business because of this profound change. How many of you are familiar with the Cheerios commercial that got released at the Super Bowl several years back? Remember? Black guy lying on a couch, asleep, and his little girl races up to him and dumps Cheerios on his chest. Supposed to be heart healthy, not Cheerios. And it's obvious that the little girl is what? Mixed, right? And then the camera shifts to the wife, and the wife is what? White. Whew, if you followed Twitter back then, it was nasty. People, how dare you air this kind of mess at the Super Bowl and the like. But I like Cheerios. And the company wasn't bothered by it. So the next year at the Super Bowl, they had another commercial with the same family. The woman pregnant again. What are they saying? Get over it. This is America. We need to be what? Accommodating of the diversity as it comes. And if you watch TV now, you see a lot of what? Commercials and the like with the diversity that is occurring under this. Remember that it's the second most rapidly growing population behind it. Living arrangements also are becoming more interesting. Cooling water from grandma's well and grandpa's too is about the most rapidly growing household type of the first decade of the new millennium. Grandparents raising grandchildren, okay? If you look at all households with children, first decade grew by about 3.8%, but households where it was just husband and wife with their kids grew by 1.4%. Households where both grandparents are raising grandchildren grew by 42%. If grandma only is doing it 9.3%, grandfather only raising grandchildren grew by 28%. Now, most of you are probably thinking, if you were like me, my grandmother was 97 when she passed away. That means she almost had an AARP card when I was born, okay? But you need to understand about these data. Half of these grandparents are between the ages of 30 and 50. What does that mean for you? Don't look all cross-eyed when one of your frontline workers walks up to you and says, I need time off this afternoon to go check on my what? Grandchild. It'll be real. We built a school for vulnerable children in North Carolina. I have a 45-year-old great-grandmother as a caregiver. I didn't say grandma, I said what? Great-grandma. See, 15, 15, 15 get you there every day in the market. Every day. You got to understand the dynamic. You got to understand how family life is changing dramatically. Now, the other issue for you regionally is some of these households are very, very vulnerable. We just released this study a couple weeks ago looking at the most vulnerable households and how do we keep people and allow them to age in place and age in their communities. Most people don't want to live in an institutionalized facility and the like, so how do you keep them in? The most vulnerable households are African American and their cost burden. They spend 30% or more of their monthly income on housing, or they're renters and have no control over where they're living. They're relying on landlords. 1.6 million households like that. 3.5 million people living in those households. 71.2% of these older adults are living independently, either as single adults or married. 21% of them are in caretaker households, and I want to focus on them, and 7.2% of them are living in caregiver households. I want to show you these caretaker households because this is what floored me and stunned me when I got. The caretaker household is usually headed by a female, median age 70, and in the household is one of her adult children, median age 42, and in the household is a grandchild, median age 17, and the adult grandma is making $14,000, and the child is making $6,000. They're living in a house that's about 50 years old. 38% of them been there 20 years or longer. Only 10% own their house free and clear. 55% of them are renters, and 74% of them are cost burden. Now, I want you to look at that older adult child. 42 years old, 43% of them are not contributing to household finance. 92% of them are widow, divorced, or never married. 62% of them have less than a high school education. 36% haven't worked in the last 5 years. 22% of them are disabled. 42% no money in the last month, and 29% no health coverage. Living with mama. Living with mama. That's the war on drugs coming home to roost. Because that 42-year-old male probably did 20. Get out, where you go? Go home. 1.6 million people like that. Older adults. It's the older adult that's the chief financial. That means there are 2 succeeding generations where there's been no intergenerational mobility. We can't allow this to happen. Gotta fix it. Gotta fix it. Diversity rules. Do I have 2 minutes here to finish it? Where's Anna? 2 minutes? Okay. I was going to do it anyway, but it's all right. No, my bad, Anna. Talk about these things really quickly. The end of men. Good news first. Let me go ahead. Good news first. Women are about to surpass men as the numerical majority of the paid workforce in America. It's good news. In 2010, women constituted 49.8% of all paid workers in the workforce. Operative term is paid workers. Women paid. Women have been working all their lives. Paid workers. That's the good news. Ladies, but this is not because we decided to treat you all fairly. Because there's still a huge gender wage gap out there, right? 40, 60, 70, 80, 82 cents on the dollar, some people say. This reality, instead, is because men are doing so poorly in American society today. Look at it. Today, 3 times as many men of working age do not work at all compared to 1969. Why don't they work? They're disabled, incarcerated, or they have skills mismatches with the way the economy is headed. Disability rate doubled between 1970 and 2009. The median wage dropped by about 13,000. But the number I want to draw your attention to is this one. After peaking in 1977, male college completion rates have barely changed over the past 35 years. The sex ratio in higher education has been 60% female, 40% male for a decade. I assure you at birth, the sex ratio is not 60-40. It's rather what? About 50-50. If you look at the data very carefully, we granted 572,000 more degrees to women than we did men in higher education in 2010. Where are the men? Where are the boys? See, ladies, the good news is y'all looking good, educated, got a little cash. The bad news is if you ain't hitched, forget about it. Not enough eligible, marriageable males to go around. And I know this to be true because I was in Atlanta a couple of weeks ago giving this talk, and a woman chastised me. She got up when I made that point and said, "You drove all the way down here to tell me that I've been living it for the last 30 years. Don't shoot the messenger for the message." Ladies and gentlemen, You cannot have stable families, stable communities, or stable anything where you have a sex ratio imbalance that way. I don't have data on your school system, but let me share the data from my school system. University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill is 43% male. Our predominantly white institutions are about 45% male, but our predominantly minority-serving and historically black colleges are about 36% male, and our community colleges are 44% male. A couple years ago, we had a college that was 80-20, 80% female, 20% male.
Nursing. Nursing?
No, it was a higher education university, not a field. No, I'm talking about institutions. I'm not talking about disciplines, the whole institution. You cannot have that, ladies and gentlemen. Got to fix it. Where are the issues? I think I got a key to it. And it's called the triple whammy of geographic disadvantage. At the intersection of what I define as the browning of America on the one hand and the graying of America on the other hand is an interesting dynamic that I think, let me develop it for you because I think this is key to what we see. So first of all, I'm going to give you a racial typology of U.S. counties. These red counties right here are racial generation gap counties. What does that mean? The adult voting age population in those counties are predominantly white, aging, empty nesters, okay? But the school age population is predominantly non-white. What kind of support for public education do you think you get there? That's the ain't got no dog in the K-12 education fight. My kids are out of school. I'm most concerned about crime, retirement amenities, and safety. And they typically vote what? Self-interest, okay? Those gold counties are minority-majority counties. The adult voting age population is predominantly non-white. The school age population is predominantly non-white. Lots of interest in education, but they're all low wealth, low tax-based counties, not enough money to go around to do anything, okay? The balance of the counties up there, and these are all gray counties, the white space here. Those are majority counties. The adult voting age population is predominantly white, the school age population is predominantly white. But in those districts, about 1/10 of the kids in those school districts are kids of color. But if you peer beneath the veneer in those school districts and look at those kids, what you'll find is they're in one of two situations. They're either attending racially isolated schools within those districts, or in the quote-unquote good schools, they are grossly underrepresented in the college prep tracks, honors, AB, IP, and the like. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, I just painted a picture of the browning of America, the new majority. They're between a rock and a hard place through no fault of their own, their education system. You can't thrive and prosper moving forward, leaving that many kids behind in terms of what we do. That's whammy number one. Whammy number two is segregation. These neighborhoods right here, this is census tract data, those neighborhoods are 60% or more non-Hispanic white, okay? Those neighborhoods right there are 60% or more non-white. And the yellow neighborhoods here are transitioning from white to non-white. We call that hyper-segregation, separate and unequal, and rivals the segregation that existed in the year 1954 when I was born, the year Brown versus the Board of Education. Whammy number two. Whammy number three, school-age poverty, census tract neighborhood level. These neighborhoods right here, 40% or more of the kids that enter school day every day come from households with incomes below the poverty level. These neighborhoods right here, between 25 and 39% of the kids that walk in the school door come from households with incomes below the poverty level. We put those two things together and we call that concentrated poverty. The yellow neighborhoods, everything else, poverty rates less than 25%, we call that concentrated affluence. When I talk about the triple whammy of geographic disadvantage, I'm talking about all three of those things. The average kid of color that walks into a school district today is exposed to some combination of all three of those things. Coming from a community where there's either little political or financial support for their education, and from households that are bereft of the economic resources that enable them to do what? Thrive and prosper in the education system. How many kids? All three of those things? 9.8 million kids. That population is 93% non-white. 12 million kids got two of those things. Let's say hypersegregation, concentrated poverty. That's 81% non-white. About 20 million kids have one of those things. That population is 39% non-white, and nowhere near about 32 million kids. That population is 24% non-white. I think that's the key right there of why we see the kinds of sex ratio imbalances in higher education. I wish it ended there, though, but it doesn't. Those are food deserts. Those are food deserts. If you put together the 3 maps I had before and that one, see the overlap? Now, my school that we operate is in Durham, North Carolina. On every indicator of competitiveness, we are all that in a bag of chips plus dip. We're an innovation center and all of that. And I made the mistake of being at our school at pickup one afternoon and started talking to 3 little girls, and I asked one of them, I said, what did you have for dinner last night? And she looked at me and she says, last night was not my turn to eat. She said, at our house, we rotate who gets to eat dinner, and I get to eat every 3rd night. Think about that for a moment. We're in the heart of a boom region, and we got kids who get to eat every 3rd night. That's it. That's it. I wish it ended there. Those are suspensions, out-of-school suspensions. 3 million kids suspended annually, and 250,000 referred to the police for misdemeanor charges as early as the 1st grade. And I just saw a study that now, if you look at preschool, about 1/3 of the kids are being dismissed, and some referred to school resource officers for misdemeanors. Those are the Latino kids, same thing that happens. I have it for your region. I know my time is probably up. I'm not going to show you your region because I don't want y'all to run out here depressed. And I need to get to the airport. I know y'all be running to each other in the parking deck and all of that. So I'm going to stop there in case that there are some. Ladies and gentlemen, if we don't, you got to see these issues as competitiveness issues for you moving forward. At the end of the day, we're not going to win. We're in a war for talent. You got to develop it. You got to develop it. And if you have an education system that isn't doing the trick, nobody is going to come. Those two things got to be joined at the hip. And so understand that these issues, the biggest thing you have to do in a community, and we have to do nationally, is that I say, is how do we get aging empty nesters to understand that they do have a dog in the K-12 education fight? Because they're right, you know. I ain't got no children in there. I understand. I'm trying to get to Aruba. I ain't trying to educate somebody else's crumb snatch. I mean, I'm being provocative here. But how do we get older adults to understand that they do have a dog in the K-12 education fight? That fight is called the future competitiveness of our nation. And I've struggled with, because I'm a boomer myself, I understand it. But here, I'm going to try it on you all. Here is the way I talk to my colleagues who are older adults. I say, you know, sooner or later, you're going to age to the level that you're going to need somebody to take care of you. I actually say, take care of your old butt, okay? You do want them to be able to count your pills. You do want them to be able to count your pills. I don't have time to show you, but I can show you there's a whole generation of kids that can't count pills. That's a competitiveness issue for us moving forward. You have the challenge here. We have it nationally. I live in one of the most high-tech, innovative centers in the world. We got the same problem. Until we understand and connect the dots between the graying of America and the browning of America and our future competitiveness in a hyper-competitive global marketplace where the new normal is certain uncertainty, if we don't frame it that way, we're going to be in deep, deep trouble. We're going to be in deep yoke. That's our competitive challenge. I think this community has the resources and the talent to rise to that challenge. I think you're the right size community to do all of this and to be a national leader in all of it. The challenge is yours. If the will is there, it's eminently doable. It's there for the asking, and you can rise to the top quickly because there's a lot of dumb stuff going on around the country, every place else. You can do this right. Thank you.